Hello, and welcome to the M.O.W. channel. Today, we will talk about the case of Donald Harvey, a man once called the Angel of Death. Between 1970 and 1987, he claimed to have killed 87 people, though investigators were able to confirm 37 victims. He was a hospital orderly who transformed into one of America's most infamous serial killers. To understand Donald Harvey's life, we must closely examine the unique environment in which he was born and raised, as well as the deeply destructive experiences he endured there. He was born on April 15, 1952, in Hamilton, Ohio, the first of three children to Ray Harvey and Goldie Harvey. While being the eldest child often comes with expectations and responsibility, the reality he faced was brutally harsh. Shortly after his birth, his family moved to a tiny town called Boonville in Kentucky. This was an isolated region nestled in the rugged terrain of the Appalachian Mountains, economically deprived and largely cut off from the outside world. His parents struggled to survive by farming tobacco on infertile land. Exhausting physical labor consumed their daily lives, leaving little room for emotional warmth toward their children. They were deeply devoted members of a local Baptist church and followed a strict, conservative approach to discipline rooted in religious doctrine. This closed and oppressive household atmosphere became an invisible barrier that prevented Harvey from expressing his inner turmoil. The most tragic aspect of Harvey's childhood began around the age of 5, when he became the victim of prolonged sexual abuse. From a very young age, he was exploited by adults he should have been able to trust. The abusers included his own uncle and nearby neighbors. Taking advantage of his inability to resist, they committed repeated assaults that continued for 13 years, until Harvey finally left the town at the age of 18. Childhood sexual abuse inflicts devastating damage on a developing sense of self. Harvey learned fear and humiliation instead of trust and intimacy. He developed an overwhelming sense of powerlessness in situations he could not control. He never told his parents or teachers, fearing that his deeply religious parents might blame him rather than protect him. Decades later, he finally confessed the truth to his younger sister, a revelation that underscored the profound isolation he endured throughout his life. His emotional instability soon affected his ability to function socially. He failed to adapt to school life, withdrew from his peers, and retreated into private fantasies. His academic performance collapsed, and by the 9th grade, he dropped out of high school entirely. With the loss of even this minimal social structure, his life began to unravel further. In 1968, he attempted to salvage his education by completing a correspondence program and passing a high school equivalency exam. However, his distorted sense of identity made a normal working life nearly impossible. In March 1971, he was arrested for theft, marking the beginning of his open disregard for social norms. Seeking to escape legal consequences and his unstable existence, he enlisted in the United States Air Force. He may have hoped that the rigid structure of military life would offer him a fresh start, but the outcome was disastrous. Military service became another personal hell. The strict hierarchy and communal living environment quickly overwhelmed his fragile mental state. During his service, he suffered from severe depression and identity confusion, attempting suicide twice. These attempts reflected his desire to escape a world that felt relentlessly hostile. Military authorities ultimately deemed him psychologically unfit for service, and after only 9 months, he was discharged for nervous breakdown. After returning to civilian life, Harvey came to fully recognize his sexual identity as a gay man. However, the conservative climate of early 1970s America, combined with his rigid religious upbringing, prevented him from accepting this part of himself in a healthy way. Instead, he internalized shame, viewing his identity as sinful and something that had to be hidden. Once again, he found himself cast as an outsider. Through this accumulation of experiences, a warped hatred toward others and an intense desire for control took root within him. Years of having his body and mind violated by others planted a destructive longing to reverse those roles, to stand in a position where he could decide life and death. To compensate for his lifelong helplessness, he sought out those weaker than himself and derived satisfaction from exerting control over them. Life itself ceased to be something sacred, becoming instead a tool to confirm his own sense of power. Poverty, isolation, rigid religious pressure, prolonged sexual abuse, educational failure, military rejection, and inner conflict over identity all formed the tragic fragments that shaped Donald Harvey. Together, they transformed him into a man who would later murder helpless patients in a place meant for healing. His early life stands as a grim example of how a human soul can be utterly shattered and reborn as something monstrous. After his discharge, Harvey left his hometown and moved to London, Kentucky. There, he found work as a hospital orderly at Marymount Hospital. At the time, the hospital was understaffed, and background checks for auxiliary workers were far less thorough than they are today. During his interview, Harvey presented himself as a quiet, diligent young man. Hospital administrators failed to detect the darkness beneath his calm exterior. To Harvey, the hospital was a uniquely powerful environment. It was filled with patients who could not even drink water without assistance. Performing caregiving duties, he became acutely aware that their survival depended entirely on him. This realization gave him a chilling sense of satisfaction. The wide hallways, the smell of disinfectant, and the mechanical hum of medical equipment offered both a sense of calm and the perfect stage for violence. For the first time in his life, he stood on the verge of holding absolute power over others. At work, Harvey initially appeared exemplary. He willingly took on unpleasant tasks and earned a reputation as a kind and reliable aide. Yet dangerous fantasies were already forming in his mind. He closely observed patients in pain, reminding himself that he alone had the ability to end their suffering. At first, he framed this impulse as compassion, convincing himself that granting peace to terminally ill patients was a noble calling. Beneath this self-deception, however, lay a deep-seated desire for revenge against the world that had abused him, along with the arrogant belief that no one could stop him. Exploiting the hospital's lax oversight, he began to look for opportunities to end lives whenever he chose. The distorted identity shaped by his upbringing had finally found an environment where it could erupt into systematic murder. Donald Harvey's employment as a hospital orderly at Marymount Hospital in London, Kentucky in 1970 marked the true beginning of one of the most horrifying serial murder sprees in American criminal history. At just 18 years old, Harvey appeared shy, quiet, and hardworking on the surface. Beneath that exterior, however, his inner world had already been twisted by years of childhood abuse and the collapse of his short military career. To him, the hospital was not a sacred place of healing, but a vast laboratory where he could erase his own feelings of helplessness and gain absolute control over life and death. His position as an orderly allowed him to move freely in and out of patient rooms, and by hiding behind this low rank, he began selecting victims without drawing suspicion. His first confirmed murder took place on May 31, 1970. The victim was Logan Evans, an 88-year-old patient who had been left severely disabled by a stroke and was unable to control his bodily functions. While assisting Evans as part of his routine duties, Harvey became enraged when the patient soiled himself. In that moment, responsibility gave way to a distorted sense of humiliation and persecution. Believing he had been insulted, Harvey closed the door, made sure no one was watching, and pressed a pillow firmly over the old man's face. Evans was too weak to resist and died from suffocation. Instead of fear or regret, Harvey felt an overwhelming sense of release and calm. When nurses later pronounced the death, no one suspected the young orderly. The passing of an elderly patient was considered natural, and Harvey realized just how easily the hospital system could absorb a murder without question. The success of his first killing emboldened him. He began to view himself as a godlike figure, deciding who deserved to live and who should die. He convinced himself that his actions were acts of mercy, labeling them euthanasia and embracing the delusion that he was an angel of death. In reality, his motives were driven by petty anger and personal whim. If a patient rang the call bell too often, complained, or if Harvey was simply in a bad mood, he would kill. Soon after Evans's death, he deliberately inserted a catheter incorrectly into another patient, James Tyree, and left him to bleed and vomit until he died. Hospital staff dismissed the death as a medical complication rather than intentional harm. Over the 10 months Harvey spent at Marymount Hospital, his methods grew increasingly brutal. Beyond suffocation with pillows, he learned to misuse medical equipment. He secretly shut off oxygen valves or connected malfunctioning machines, watching patients slowly suffocate. In July 1970, he committed one of his most sadistic acts against a patient named Ben Gilbert. After rendering him unconscious, Harvey straightened a metal coat hanger and forced it through the patient's urinary catheter, puncturing internal organs. Gilbert developed severe internal injuries and peritonitis, dying after days of extreme agony. Harvey watched his suffering with satisfaction, intoxicated by the power he held over his victims. Drug overdoses also became one of his preferred methods. He administered lethal amounts of powerful painkillers, such as Demerol and morphine, to elderly patients, including a 91-year-old woman named Margaret Harrison, causing fatal cardiac arrest. At the time, medication controls at the hospital were lax, allowing even an orderly easy access to drug storage and discarded supplies. Harvey studied patient charts, memorized diagnoses, and calculated which drugs would be most effective. His list of victims continued to grow. Elizabeth Wyatt, Eugene McQueen, Viola Reed and others all died under his care. After each death, Harvey displayed a chilling duality. offering comfort to grieving families while knowing he was responsible. The continuation of his crimes was aided by the rigid and hierarchical culture of hospitals at the time. Even when nurses felt that certain deaths were suspicious, they hesitated to challenge doctors or raise formal concerns. Harvey was known among staff as diligent and dependable. He smiled often, treated patients kindly in public, and volunteered for tasks others avoided, including transporting bodies to the morgue. In truth, he chose this duty so he could see his victims one last time and ensure no evidence had been overlooked. Walking the dim corridors toward the morgue, he began to mentally count the lives he had taken, developing a grotesque sense of ownership over them. In March 1971, after killing Milton Bryant Sutter with a morphine overdose, Harvey left Marymount Hospital. During his short time there, he is believed to have murdered at least 12 patients, a number that represents only a fraction of what he later claimed. His experience at Marymount taught him how effortless killing could be, and how effectively a large medical institution could conceal individual crimes. By the time he left, he was no longer a troubled young man. He had fully awakened as a serial killer, addicted to the knowledge that a single gesture from his hand could extinguish a human life. The violence that began in this small Kentucky hospital would later expand to larger hospitals in Ohio, evolving into an even more frenzied campaign of murder. Harvey walked away from Marymount, leaving no immediate evidence behind, but the shadow of death he cast remained with the families of his victims, an invisible wound that would never heal. As he departed London, Harvey felt no remorse for what he had done. Instead, he reinforced his belief that his actions had been beneficial, a twisted form of kindness. This self-deception became the psychological armor that allowed him to continue killing for years without being discovered. Armed with the medical knowledge and drug familiarity he gained during those 10 months, he began planning future crimes. Marymount Hospital became the incubator where the monster known as Donald Harvey was fully formed, and the innocent blood spilled. There was only a warning of the far greater horrors yet to come. After leaving Marymount Hospital, Donald Harvey moved his killing ground to Cincinnati, Ohio, where his crimes became far more daring and methodical. While working at the Cincinnati Veterans Medical Center and later at Drake Memorial Hospital, he evolved from a low-level hospital worker into a calculated killer who actively fused medical knowledge with murder. During this period, the most striking feature of Harvey's behavior was the diversification of his methods. He deliberately changed tools and techniques each time to prevent hospitals or investigators from detecting a consistent pattern. To him, the hospital was a vast arsenal, and every medication and piece of equipment became a potential weapon. Harvey's preferred tools were poisons. He developed a particular fascination with cyanide and arsenic. He understood precisely that these substances were lethal, even in small amounts and difficult to detect with the standard hospital tests of the time. He mixed poison into orange juice, apple juice, or liquid nutrition fed through tubes. Patients who ingested cyanide often suffered sudden cardiac arrest or respiratory failure and died within minutes. Medical staff usually attributed these deaths to worsening heart disease or natural complications. Harvey calmly observed as his victims struggled and died, then rushed forward to handle the bodies himself once death was confirmed. In addition to poisons, he made extensive use of medication abuse. Drugs such as insulin, morphine, and heparin were life-saving when used properly, but deadly in his hands. He injected large doses of insulin into non-diabetic patients to trigger hypoglycemic shock, or overdosed heart patients with heparin to cause internal bleeding. He also employed air embolism, injecting large air bubbles into intravenous lines to block blood flow to the heart or brain, resulting in sudden death. These methods were extremely difficult to identify even during autopsy, allowing Harvey to remain undetected for years. His violence eventually extended beyond hospital walls into his private life. Driven by a need for control, he poisoned his partner and roommate Carl Huller. Fearing abandonment, Harvey repeatedly mixed arsenic into Huller's food, not to kill him outright, but to weaken him physically and make him dependent. Huller suffered long-term vomiting and paralysis and became reliant on Harvey's care. Harvey derived a disturbing sense of fulfillment from first making his partner ill and then nursing him. His obsession did not stop there. He also poisoned Huller's elderly father, Henry Huller, who later died from kidney failure caused by arsenic poisoning. Harvey's cruelty toward neighbors further exposed his capacity for casual murder. After conflicts or simple personal dislike, he poisoned food given to people living nearby. One neighbor, Helen Metzger, ate a pie Harvey had prepared and died in extreme agony from internal organ failure. Another neighbor, Diane Alexander, was infected when Harvey mixed hepatitis contaminated serum into her drink. While working as an autopsy assistant, He had secretly stolen infected fluids and viral samples from the hospital. These acts bordered on biological terrorism. Watching people slowly deteriorate from illness fed his delusion that he had godlike authority over human fate. Physical violence also remained part of his repertoire. Harvey suffocated patients by covering their mouths and noses with plastic bags soaked in water, or blocked tracheostomy openings with his fingers. Patients such as Nathaniel Watson and Leon Nelson died in this manner. He became addicted to the brief moment when a victim struggled for life, and he alone controlled the outcome. After death, he sometimes engaged in disturbing rituals such as burning strands of hair or mutilating parts of the body, revealing how hollow his early claims of mercy truly were. Harvey possessed extensive knowledge of his killing tools. He studied toxicology books at libraries and analyzed hospital drug references to learn which substances broke down after death. Because of this careful preparation, dozens of deaths appeared only as a statistical increase among high-risk patients. Within the hospital, Harvey was seen as exceptionally kind and dedicated. Doctors and nurses trusted him completely. He used that trust as a shield, caring for patients by day and ending their lives in secret. By the time he was operating in Cincinnati, Harvey had lost any remaining sense of human empathy. He no longer saw people as individuals, but as pieces on a chessboard he could manipulate at will. Some were granted swift deaths, others were condemned to prolonged suffering. His nickname Angel of Death became a reflection of the identity he embraced. His collection of tools included syringes, plastic bags, rat poison, arsenic, cyanide, and contaminated blood. Within the closed and hierarchical world of hospitals, these instruments erased countless innocent lives. Harvey believed that the variety of his methods made him untouchable. He continued killing without realizing that attention was slowly turning toward him. By the mid-1980s, his confidence had reached its peak. A glass of juice in his hand became a final offering, and a ventilator switch he touched became an execution blade. His refined and merciless crimes continued to claim lives until an unexpected fracture finally appeared. All of Harvey's methods shared one core element. They exploited absolute helplessness. He targeted patients who could not defend themselves, killing them in the most cowardly and cruel ways imaginable. The tools themselves were not evil, but in the hands of a deeply corrupted man, they became instruments of horror. The techniques described in this chapter explain why Donald Harvey is remembered not as an ordinary criminal, but as one of the most lethal serial killers in American history. The moment Donald Harvey's seemingly flawless crimes began to surface came in March 1987. After hiding for decades behind the protection of large hospital systems, the so-called Angel of Death exposed himself through a small but fatal mistake. The chain of events began with the sudden death of a patient named John Powell. Powell had been admitted to Drake Memorial Hospital after a serious motorcycle accident. He relied on life support and was fighting for survival, but doctors believed his condition was gradually improving. Then one night, he suffered a sudden seizure and died without warning. Under normal circumstances, the death of a critically injured patient might have been quietly accepted. This case was different. During the autopsy, medical examiner Dr. Robert Fragmeyer noticed something unusual. A faint but unmistakable almond-like odor rose from the body, a classic indicator of cyanide poisoning. The presence of poison in an accident victim was impossible to ignore. Further testing revealed extremely high levels of cyanide in Powell's blood and organs. Police immediately launched an investigation, questioning everyone who had access to the patient's room. Donald Harvey's name quickly emerged. Investigators uncovered troubling information from Harvey's past. While working at the Cincinnati Veterans Hospital, he had been pressured to resign after being caught stealing body parts from the autopsy room, allegedly for occult purposes. This disturbing history convinced detectives that Harvey was far more than an ordinary hospital aide. When taken in for questioning, Harvey unexpectedly confessed to killing Powell. He claimed he had acted out of mercy, insisting that Powell was suffering and that euthanasia was an act of compassion. At first, police considered closing the case as a single incident. One person was not convinced. That person was Pat Minarich, an investigative reporter and news anchor at WCPO-TV in Cincinnati. After hearing Harvey's confession, Minarich was certain that no hospital worker would commit only one mercy killing. In her experience, this fit the psychology of a serial killer. During a live broadcast, Minarich publicly asked whether there were more victims. After the segment aired, anonymous tips poured in from nurses at Drake Memorial Hospital. They revealed that patient deaths increased dramatically on days Harvey worked, far beyond what statistics could reasonably explain. Some nurses admitted they had reported their concerns to hospital administrators, only to be ignored. The hospital feared the damage that would come from admitting a staff member had been murdering patients, and chose silence over investigation. Terrified that Harvey might receive light punishment and return to work, The nurses provided Minarich with internal records and critical information. Using these tips, Minarich conducted a relentless investigation. Over several months, she obtained lists of deceased patients and matched them against Harvey's work schedule. The pattern was undeniable. Dozens of patients had died when Harvey was the sole staff member on duty. In a 30-minute televised special, she presented evidence linking Harvey to at least 24 murders at Drake Memorial Hospital over a 4-year period. The broadcast shocked Cincinnati and ignited public outrage. Most of the victims had been elderly or severely ill, making it easy for the hospital to overlook or conceal the rising death toll. As the situation spiraled out of control, Harvey's court-appointed attorney Bill Whalen realized the gravity of the case. If Minarich's findings entered the courtroom, Harvey would almost certainly face the death penalty under Ohio law. Whalen visited Harvey in jail and asked him directly how many people he had truly killed. Without hesitation or emotion, Harvey calmly estimated around 70 victims. The answer stunned even his own lawyer. To save his client's life, Whalen proposed a plea deal. Harvey would fully confess to his crimes and accept life imprisonment without parole in exchange for avoiding execution. Prosecutors agreed, believing that uncovering the full truth and giving answers to grieving families was more important than pursuing death sentences. What followed was a series of interrogations that felt like a horror film. Harvey recited names, dates, and methods with chilling precision. He explained which victims were poisoned with arsenic, which were given rat poison, and which were suffocated with plastic bags. He spoke less about their suffering and more about how cleverly he had avoided detection. He even mocked the hospital system, claiming that doctors and nurses were too quick to label deaths as natural and too lazy to demand autopsies. Many of his victims had already been cremated or buried, leaving little physical evidence behind. Despite this, Harvey's confessions were so detailed that they aligned with hospital records and witness testimony. Piece by piece, the hidden truth came together. The investigation became more than a criminal case. It forced a nationwide reckoning with hospital oversight and patient safety in the United States. In August 1987, Harvey appeared in court and pleaded guilty to 24 counts of first-degree murder connected to Drake Memorial Hospital. Further proceedings revealed additional killings at Marymount Hospital in Kentucky and the Cincinnati Veterans Hospital. Harvey referred to his murders as work and showed no visible remorse. Viewers watching the trial were deeply disturbed by the contrast between his ordinary, almost gentle appearance and the unimaginable brutality of his actions. Through Minarich's persistence, Whalen's legal strategy, and the prosecutor's decision, the true face of the Angel of Death was finally exposed. Harvey's confessions brought unbearable pain to the victims' families, but also answered the question of why their loved ones had died so suddenly. Hospitals issued public apologies and promised sweeping reforms in staff, screening and patient safety. This case became a historic warning. The truth does not surface on its own. It requires courage from whistleblowers and relentless pursuit from those willing to challenge powerful institutions. Donald Harvey's downfall was not just the end of a serial killer, but a moment that forced society to confront how easily the most vulnerable can be forgotten in places meant to heal. Donald Harvey was officially convicted of 37 murders during his 1987 trial, but he himself claimed that the true number of his victims reached as high as 87. Because of this, he is recorded as one of the deadliest serial killers in American history. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, Harvey accepted a plea deal that resulted in multiple life sentences with no possibility of parole. He was incarcerated at the Toledo Correctional Institution in Toledo, Ohio. Harvey's life in prison unfolded differently from that of most inmates. Rather than showing remorse for his crimes, he treated them as a source of authority and notoriety. He frequently boasted to other prisoners about the murders he had committed, describing the suffering of his victims and taking pride in how long he had evaded the law. To him, the lives he had taken were trophies, not tragedies. Although prison officials described Harvey as quiet and reserved, his presence alone provoked deep anger among fellow inmates. In the unspoken moral code of prison life, crimes against the elderly and the sick are considered among the most cowardly acts. Harvey had preyed on people who could not defend themselves, and this made him a target of intense resentment. For decades, he lived a relatively stable life behind bars, eating regular meals and requesting special accommodations based on religious claims. That fragile and deceptive peace came to an end in March 2017. At the time, Harvey was 64 years old and still openly glorifying his crimes. His behavior deeply disturbed another inmate named James Elliott, who was housed in the same facility. On March 28, 2017, Harvey was attacked inside his cell while completely defenseless. Elliott brutally beat him, repeatedly striking his head and chest. The man who once decided life and death for helpless hospital patients was now powerless, experiencing the same vulnerability he had inflicted on others. When correctional officers discovered Harvey, He was unconscious and severely injured. He was rushed to a nearby hospital and placed under intensive care. 2 days later, on March 30, 2017, Donald Harvey died. The so-called Angel of Death, who had spent his life killing patients in hospital beds, met his own end on one. James Elliott openly explained his motive. During the legal proceedings that followed, he stated that he was originally from Kentucky and felt a strong emotional connection to the families of Harvey's early victims at Marymount Hospital. Elliott said he was disgusted by Harvey's lack of remorse and enraged by the way he spoke about killing elderly patients as if they were heroic accomplishments. He claimed that attacking Harvey made him feel like a vigilante delivering justice. Investigators also revealed that Elliott harbored resentment over Harvey receiving better meals in prison due to religious accommodations. These combined feelings of hatred, jealousy, and moral outrage ultimately exploded into violence. Public reaction to Harvey's death was deeply divided. Many people believed that a man, responsible for so much suffering, had finally received the punishment he deserved, viewing his death as an example of inevitable consequences. Others raised serious concerns about prison safety and the failure of the justice system when punishment is carried out through inmate violence rather than the law. The judge who presided over the case, Myron Dahart, emphasized that no individual has the right to act as judge and jury, regardless of how evil the victim may be. Elliott was sentenced to an additional term, ranging from 25 years to life in prison. Already a repeat offender, this sentence ensured that he would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. Harvey's death permanently blocked any chance of fully uncovering the truth behind his many suspected crimes. Of the more than 80 victims, he claimed, a large number were never officially identified. Until his final days, Harvey refused to provide a complete and verifiable account of his actions and continued to justify his murders. After his death, hospitals connected to his crimes, including Drake Memorial Hospital, revisited their past failures and held memorials for the victims. The Harvey case became more than the story of a serial killer. It exposed dangerous weaknesses in the oversight of medical support staff and forced the American healthcare system to confront the consequences of neglect and silence. Harvey began his life as a victim of severe childhood abuse, later became a perpetrator of unimaginable cruelty, and ultimately died as a victim of violence himself. His life illustrates how cycles of abuse and power can destroy the human soul. Harvey believed he was a righteous figure delivering merciful deaths. In reality, he was a cowardly predator who hunted the most vulnerable to satisfy a twisted desire for control. Years after his death, medical institutions continue to strengthen ethical training and monitoring systems to ensure that someone like Harvey never gains such unchecked power again. In the end, Harvey's death closed the chapter on a life defined by killing. He experienced fear and pain similar to what he had inflicted on others, and his story stands as a grim reminder that extreme violence never triumphs. Today, his name remains in criminology textbooks and medical ethics discussions as a warning of a tragedy that must never be repeated. That concludes today's case file. Please subscribe and like the video. We will continue to bring you new cases and mysteries to spark your curiosity. Thank you for watching.